You've heard the boiling frog metaphor, right? The one that says that if you drop a frog into hot water, it will jump out immediately to save itself. But if you place a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly heat it, the frog won't notice until it's too late and will end up dying in the boiling water. Now, this tale gets told a lot, probably because it's such a great metaphor for how we tend to overlook gradual negative changes in our environment. So it really is a shame that it's a complete myth. Some scientists actually went ahead and tried it.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
And it turns out that if you heat the water a frog is sitting in, at some point the frog will notice, hey, this water is hot, and will jump the hell out because frogs aren't idiots. And you shouldn't be one either. It's hard to imagine someone going through an entire career without ever ending up in a bad job. You'd have to be one lucky potato, as the saying goes here in Denmark, where we apparently have a huge number of vegetable-related popular expressions, to work 4 or 5 decades and never once run into a bad boss, jerk coworkers, work stress, insane workloads, unfair compensation, unethical business practices, or a toxic workplace culture. So pretty much everyone will have to make a choice whether or not to quit a bad job at least a few times in their lives. And make no mistake about it, this is one of life's bigger decisions. It's right up there with choice of life partner or buying a home in terms of how it can affect you, your finances, your life circumstances, and your loved ones. But many people are still woefully unprepared for this choice and have no framework with which to consider it constructively. You see, there are these powerful psychological and social forces that conspire to keep us from quitting. And not only can the mere thought of leaving a job provoke feelings of fear and insecurity, there is also a strong social stigma attached to quitting. This makes people stay for way too long in jobs they do not like. So in this video, we're going to look at why quitting is sometimes the best option and expose all of the biases and propaganda that try to convince us that quitting is a bad thing. We're going to talk about how you can know it's time to quit, but also what to do if you hate your job but can't leave it right now for some reason. And if someone you care about is stuck in a bad job, we're also going to talk about how you can support others to get the hell out. Let me be crystal clear about my goal for this video. I want to normalize quitting a job simply because it's bad for you, to make it perfectly natural and commonplace to leave a workplace for no other reason than you're not happy there, so that you don't end up metaphorically boiling to death like some oblivious fake frog. And if you're watching this, there's a good chance that you or someone you care about is in that situation right now. If you are, you probably already know how much it sucks, but we should talk about it anyway. Partly for the benefit of those people who think that hating your job is just something you gotta accept, and partly to see if I can't scare some more people into quitting. Because it gets pretty bad. Being unhappy at work is not a trivial matter. It's not something you should suck up or just learn to deal with. Research shows that hating your job has some pretty terrifying consequences. Let's look at those. Hating your job can make you sick. A huge meta-analysis of studies, including over 250,000 employees, found a positive correlation between job strain and poor physical health. Why would that be? Well, the best guess is that being miserable at work puts your body in a near constant state of stress and tension that lowers your immune system, so you're more vulnerable to any number of diseases. Sleep is good for you, both in terms of duration and quality. But people who are miserable at work often find it harder to fall asleep, or they don't sleep as well. You may have been there yourself, lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, staring at the ceiling or the ticking clock on the nightstand as thoughts of your endless to-do list or a bad boss dance through your head. Now, if you dislike your job and see the pounds piling on, the two could well be related. Studies have shown that an unhappy work life takes away the energy you need to exercise and make healthy lifestyle choices. Or to put it another way, after a long, frustrating day at work, you are way less likely to go for a run and much more likely to go for a tub of ice cream. If you work really hard, but feel appreciated at work and see your work making a difference, you are not as likely to become stressed. On the other hand, if you're being treated badly, or if nothing you do at work is ever recognized and you spend your workdays in a more or less permanent state of frustration and worry, you can become stressed even if you only work 30 hours a week. And studies have shown that workplace stress directly increases the risk of depression and burnout. One of the worst things, in my opinion, about hating your job is that it doesn't stop at the end of the workday. For many people, it spills over and affects their whole life, and studies show that people who are unhappy at work have less satisfying sex lives and more problems in their romantic relationships. It's really ironic that some people are reluctant to quit because they're afraid it will look bad on their CV and hurt their career. It should really be the other way around. We know from a ton of research that being unhappy at work makes you less productive, which obviously can hurt your career. And we also just saw that being unhappy at work can lead to stress and burnout, which can completely derail a career. Some people take months or years to recover from burnout, and some never come back. So if you're not happy at work, quitting might be the best thing you can do to protect your career. So, given that disliking your job is so bad for you, why should quitting be so hard? I partly blame the idiotic motivational anti-quitting propaganda on social media. It is all over the goddamn place. Instagram seems to be particularly infested by it, but LinkedIn might be a close second. Here's the single worst example I've ever seen. Someone posted this video on LinkedIn of a Japanese amateur relay runner who fell and broke her leg, but then crawled on bloody knees to tag her teammate. And just to be clear, people celebrated this runner as heroic, committed, and a true champion. Here's a selection of some of the typical comments on that video. That's bullshit. You know what a true champion would have done? They would have recognized that continuing on a broken leg could make an injury a lot worse and probably end their career. They would remember that this is just one race in the season and there are many more to come. You've got to wonder what makes a person continue a race with a broken leg instead of doing the right thing and immediately get medical attention. Was it the coach or the team that drove it, or is there something in the national culture that made it more likely to happen? And you also have to wonder what makes people celebrate this kind of crap instead of seeing it for what it really is, a pathological inability to quit, even when it's obviously the right choice. Not only is this kind of anti-quitting propaganda vapid and simplistic, it's also doing us a major disservice, and as you can probably tell, that annoys the crap out of me. But it is also undeniably very effective because it exploits some powerful cognitive and social biases. If you want to create effective propaganda, always make it so that it exploits an existing bias. For example, Nazi propaganda made Jews look dirty, slimy, and disease-ridden because humans have a powerful bias against illness and uncleanliness. It creates a feeling of disgust that turns us against whatever caused it. It's also no coincidence that both Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump ran on a platform to make America great again. Reagan just had a "let's" in front of it. That works so well because it exploits the nostalgia bias, a completely unfounded sense that the world used to be better in the good old days, which really just reflects the fact that for many people life was simpler and happier back then because they were younger back then. And in the same way, the anti-quitting propaganda exploits some other fundamental flaws in our minds. It's really very clever, but it's also very wrong. Let's look at which biases they play into exactly, because once you're aware of them, you are less likely to be swayed by them. When you've spent a lot of time, money, or energy on something, it becomes very hard to walk away from it. People think, I've invested so much in this already. If I quit, that will all have been wasted. Email scammers utilize this perfectly. Have you ever gotten an email from a South African oil executive who needs to get $89 million out of the country and will give you 10% of the loot if you help him? If you say yes, you will be told that they're ready to wire the money to you, but there is a small transfer fee of $20. Now, this may look fishy to you, but you think, what the hell? It's only a tiny amount and the potential payoff is huge. So you send them the $20. After that comes a $200 filing fee, then it's a $2,000 payment to a lawyer, and so on and so forth. If the scammer had started out asking for $2,000, a lot of people would have caught on. But the more you have already paid, the more you're likely to pay. And that's how some people end up losing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to these scams. And a similar thing can happen with a bad job that has cost you so much pain and stress already. Walking away from all of that means having to admit to yourself that you could have left earlier and you may have wasted a lot of effort, time, and energy on a bad job. People have a tendency to prefer choices where the outcome is known over choices that lead to an uncertain outcome, even if the unknown outcome is likely to be better. Staying in a bad job is bad, but you know just how bad it is. Quitting is probably better, but it is an unknown outcome, and we have a tendency to avoid those. We also tend to prefer choices that maintain the current situation over ones that change it, or we prefer not to make a choice at all. So staying in a bad job is likely to seem preferable to quitting in your mind. Loss aversion means that once we have something, we hate to lose it. And the endowment effect makes us assign a higher value to things we have than things we don't have. Things we don't have yet just don't feel as valuable. So the money, benefits, or status, or whatever you've accrued in your current job will seem more painful to lose and more valuable in your mind compared to whatever a new job can offer you. Given these cognitive biases, it's already hard enough for us to get out, which might help explain why people stay stuck in bad jobs, bad marriages, bad educations, etc. We don't need the added burden of simplistic never give up advice, making it even harder for us. Being aware of the biases means that you can better resist them instead of letting your imperfect mind make bad choices with its flawed heuristics. But in addition to these internal pressures, we also get pressured from the outside by other people in some pretty insidious ways to never quit.
I've been pretty unhappy in my job for quite a while now. The workplace is stressed, I feel completely unappreciated, and I can't really see the purpose of most of the work I do. I want to get out of there, but whenever I tell my friends and family, I get the same reaction. Are you sure that's the right thing to do? Surely it can't be that bad. Maybe things will get better. My parents were worried how I would provide for my family and basically called me selfish for not just sticking with it. One friend even warned me that quitting will look bad on your CV.
This comment from a reader of my blog perfectly illustrates how society stigmatizes people who quit. Quitting is seen as weak, as a lack of passion, or as personal failure. In my last video on the cult of overwork, I did an image search for quitting is an option, and all I got back was images reaffirming the anti-quitting propaganda, including this nifty little one that proclaims that bleeding is acceptable, yada, 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 but quitting is never acceptable. As I see it, never give up is easy to say, and so it gets repeated a lot. It's still not true, and that makes it tremendously bad advice. Look at pretty much any successful person, and I bet you their past is littered with things they used to do at one time and then gave up. For instance, try to guess what these somewhat successful people have in common. Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Tiger Woods, Reese Witherspoon, John McEnroe, and John Steinbeck. Every single one of them dropped out of Stanford. Please explain to me again how winners never quit and quitters never win. Yes, sometimes you've got to stick with something, even through tough times, but sometimes you have to have the courage to give up. And you have to be open to the fact that sometimes giving up is the best way forward. It is incredibly important to build that skill set for yourself. And some of this propaganda goes even further and says that not only is quitting wrong, even thinking about quitting, even entertaining the notion for a second, is a sign of weakness, and any doubts you have must be stamped out immediately. I can't know, but I suspect that the people who believe this kind of thing have fallen for the idea that you can do or be anything you want as long as you believe in it strongly enough and want it enough. That is an attitude that spread from America to the rest of the world, starting out with positive thinking and being spread by bullshit like the law of attraction and The Secret. These people think they can force success to happen for them if they police their thinking to be 100% committed and positive and optimistic 100% of the time.
I will sell this house today.
But if they lose that, they might lose everything and never be successful. The truth is, of course, that having doubts is perfectly natural and something you need to take seriously. I think it makes a lot more sense to tell people to know why they do, what they do, and occasionally evaluate if it still makes sense to be doing it. There should be zero shame in giving up a fight you can't win or in dropping a goal that no longer works for you. Quite the opposite. It's the sign of a strong, mature mind to have the courage to reevaluate what you're doing and either choose to keep doing it or to choose to stop. So the next time you see someone post one of these never give up type images on social media, be sure to tell them just how wrong and dumb and harmful that type of advice is. So given these internal and external pressures to just keep doing whatever you're doing, no matter how much you hate it, it's no wonder that for many people, quitting becomes a last resort, something you do only once all hope is lost. It's what you do, they think, once you're completely broken and exhausted. And that's why many people stay in bad jobs until or past their breaking points. And what's worse, people often internalize this anti-quitting bias so much that they start to make all sorts of excuses to convince themselves why they shouldn't quit, even though they hate their job. Let's look at some of the most common excuses. I've given speeches in workplaces all over the world, so I have talked to a ton of people about their work lives. And I noticed again and again that when people hated their jobs but were resistant to the idea of quitting, many of the same excuses kept coming up. Hell, I've made some of those excuses myself in bad jobs where I knew deep down I should quit but was afraid to go in and do it. Have you ever found yourself making any of these excuses for why you should stay in a crappy job? Things might get better. You know, my asshole manager might be promoted out of there, that bullying coworker could quit, and that mountain of overwork could suddenly disappear. And sure, that could happen. On the other hand, nothing might change, or things might actually get worse. If you've already done your level best to improve your work situation and nothing's happened, just waiting around for things to improve by themselves makes very little sense. And even if you do hang on, the company can fire you at any time they want, and you'd still be out of a job. My boss is such a jerk, but if I quit now, they win. Who cares? This is not about winning or losing. This is your life. Move on already. I'm not a quitter. Don't be a quitter. No one likes a quitter. Winners never quit and quitters never win. Do any of these sound familiar? In traditional thinking, once you've started something, you should never quit. And if you do, it is a clear sign of failure. I say that's completely wrong. And sometimes quitting is exactly the right thing to do. Have you ever heard of the opera soprano Tina Keebout? Here she is in Babette's Feast, the 1987 Academy Award winner for Best Foreign Film. As a child, Tina was a pretty good violinist and spent much of her free time practicing that instrument with dreams of turning pro. Now, one day she participated in a violin contest, and when she saw how much better some of the other players were, she realized two things. One, she would never be more than a mediocre violinist, and two, she actually enjoyed singing a lot more. She quit the violin and threw herself into singing instead. If she had seen quitting as always the wrong thing to do, she might have ended up as an adequate violinist. But because she had the guts to quit, she could devote herself to something better and ended up as a star of international opera. Some people see quitting as a sign of weakness. I say that's nonsense. If anything, it's easier to just keep mindlessly going into that job you hate day after day, year after year. Hey, it may be horrible, but you know what you have. And you avoid the uncertainty of having to make a big life-changing decision. Quitting, on the other hand, takes guts. In fact, quitting a workplace that is toxic or getting away from a boss who's a complete asshole can be a downright heroic act. Quitting will look bad on my CV and may hurt my career. And that may be, but here's the thing. Staying for years in a job you hate that is slowly wearing you down is not going to be awesome for your career either. A 3-month absence due to work-related burnout is also going to be pretty noticeable to future recruiters. This excuse completely ignores the career risks of staying in a job you hate that we talked about earlier. In fact, the longer you stay, the more you lose the energy, motivation, and self-confidence you need to advance your career. You could even reverse this and use it to your advantage. Imagine telling a recruiter that you quit your last job because you were treated badly and hated it there. Now, imagine that they see that as a bad thing that disqualifies you from working there. I would argue that that shows you very clearly that this workplace has terrible priorities and you shouldn't work there, allowing you to nope right out. On the other hand, if you can proudly proclaim that you had the guts and willpower to quit a horrible job and the recruiter gets it, then that is much more likely to be a good workplace. If I quit, I'll lose my salary, status, company car, the recognition of my peers, and all of that stuff. And that is perfectly true. Quitting a job carries a cost, and that makes it scary. We all know this intimately, and we don't like it. That's the loss aversion bias that we talked about earlier in action. But while the cost of quitting is very clear to us, few ever ask themselves this question: what could it cost me to stay in a job that makes me unhappy? And that price can be very, very high, as we saw previously. It can ruin your work life, yes, but also your marriage, your family life, your health, your self-esteem, and your sanity. Not all at once maybe, but a little bit every day, like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water. Everywhere else is just as bad. Some people are convinced that all work sucks. The hilarious and underappreciated Drew Carey show summed it up in 8 seconds.
But I hate my job.
Oh, you hate your job? Oh my God, why don't you say so? No, there's a support group for that. It's called Everybody. They meet at the bar.
That's funny, but it's also not true. There are plenty of great workplaces in every country and in every industry. Saying everywhere else is just as bad, that's just your fear talking, or possibly your trauma. If you've been mistreated at work, it can be difficult to believe that there are workplaces out there that won't do the same to you all over again. But they are out there. Go find them. I've invested so much in this job already. Yes, you may have sacrificed a lot of time, energy, and dignity already in attempts to make things better. And this will make it more difficult for you to call it quits. This is the literal definition of the sunk cost fallacy that we talked about earlier. Quit anyway. Staying on is just throwing good time and energy after bad. I'll lose my health insurance. This is a particular concern for US workers, and I have a lot of sympathy for this argument. Where I live in Denmark, everybody gets free healthcare regardless of their employment situation. So I can't imagine the leverage this must give employers. To my American friends, I say, go vote for some politicians who will introduce single-payer healthcare. And also, you might ask yourself this: what good is job-related health insurance if it's actually your job that's making you sick, which a bad job can absolutely do? My job pays really well. I have zero sympathy for this excuse. I don't care how well your job pays. If it makes you unhappy, it's not worth it. Quite the contrary, if you're making a lot of money right now, use that financial security to quit and find a job that will make you happy. Also, finding a job you like will boost your performance. Happy employees are more productive, we know from studies, potentially leading to more promotions and a higher salary down the road in a job you actually like. Others depend on me. How can you be so selfish and quit your job? You're letting down the workplace, your customers, and your coworkers. Also, think of your family. How are they going to manage if you quit? Here's what I think. If you don't like your job, you're not doing anyone a favor by staying. When you're unhappy at work, it tends to affect everyone around you through a phenomenon called emotional contagion. And there's a good chance you're making your coworkers and possibly even customers less happy. As for your family, maybe they would be happier if you didn't come home from work every day tired, frustrated, and burned out. You might even set a good example for your kids. At one of my speeches way back, an audience member told me that she would always quit a job she hated because
If I go into work day after day at a job I hate and come home stressed and angry every day, what am I teaching my kids?
maybe it would actually be better for your partner and kids if you got a good job so you don't come home from work every day tired, irritable, stressed, or frustrated. Of course, you may not be in a position to quit right now. I get that. So a little later, we're going to talk about how to cope if you can't quit. So here's the big question. Should you quit?
Quiero saber si me llevaré hoy una paliza. Todo indica que sí.
And the answer is, of course, how the hell would I know? I don't know you at all. But you know who knows you? You do. The only one who is in a position to answer that question is you. Which, of course, raises another question. How do you know it's time for you to quit a bad job? Should you quit at the first sign of trouble? As in, the cafeteria is out of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee and Janet gave me a funny look at the last staff meeting? I'm out of here. Or do you only quit once all hope is gone? Yes, I know my boss is a total jerk. My salary is lousy and my coworkers just set my desk on fire for the third time today, but you never know. Things might get better tomorrow. When is it time to quit? I have talked to any number of people who have told me some variation of, I quit my job last year and my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. However, very few people have ever told me that I quit my job last year and it was a huge mistake. I should definitely have stayed on. This does not mean that it's always the right decision to quit, but it does show that when in doubt, most people stay on in bad jobs longer than is good for them for all of the reasons we've talked about. And worst of all, staying in a bad job where you repeatedly feel demeaned or useless robs you of precisely those personal resources you need to move on and find a new job. To actually get up and go out and find new work or finding the courage to quit without having the next job lined up takes energy, motivation, passion, and confidence. So let's tackle the original question. How do you know it's time to quit? And first of all, you will never know for sure. It's not like you can calculate the exact optimal moment to quit your job. It will always be a judgment call. And like any other major decision in life, you'll have to make it in the absence of complete 100% certainty. It's less about making the right decision and more about making a decision and then making that the right decision. If you wait until all hope is lost and you're 100% sure that quitting is now the only way out, you've waited too long. Secondly, you probably do have a pretty good sense of it. Call it intuition or call it gut feeling. If it's time to quit, then somewhere inside of you, a voice is probably going, I hate my job. I need to get out of here. The trick is to listen to that voice because it's very quiet and very easy to quell. You're maybe at work in the middle of a meeting or an important task when suddenly you get the feeling that you really, really need to find a new job. That's certainly not convenient in that moment. Right then, you need to focus on whatever it is you're doing. So you ignore that feeling and get back to work. Another reliable indicator is how your job makes you feel in your free time. If you spend all weekend worrying about the next workday back, or if negative thoughts and feelings about work often intrude on your free time, then that is not a good sign. And thirdly, you can ask yourself this. What would 12-year-old you admire you for doing in your current situation? Or looking back 10 years from now, what would 10-year-older you admire you for doing? Now, most people, once they quit, find that their situation improves. Some immediately, but certainly after a little while. I've quit 3 different jobs in my work life, and in every single case, my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. In 2 of those cases, I quit without having the next job lined up. It was simply time for me to move on now. Most recently, I quit my career as an international corporate speaker. I've been doing it since 2003, but for the last couple of years, I really wasn't enjoying it anymore. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why it stopped being fun for me, but part of it is that there is just too much bullshit in this field, and too many people who attract attention by saying either platitudes or complete unverifiable nonsense. My previous longest stint in any job was 5 years, so this has been over 3 times as long. Maybe 16 years doing the same thing is just enough for me. In any case, I pulled the trigger and stopped doing it with no other future plans. And believe me when I say that I went through all of the same fears and used many of the same excuses that I talk about in this video in the process. But at the end of the day, I can admire myself for taking my own advice and for having the courage to stop doing something I'm successful at, but just don't enjoy anymore. That's just my thinking. There are a huge number of other valid reasons for quitting. Let's look at those. We've seen that quitting is hard, but it might be more accurate to say that some kinds of quitting are hard. When a person quits a job because they got a better one, with a higher salary, a fancier title, or in a more prestigious company, no one bats an eye. This is widely seen as a positive, powerful, and proactive move. But if a person quits a job simply because they don't like what they're currently doing,
well, then everyone loses their minds.
Those 2 situations ought to be treated exactly the same. If you're unhappy at work, it means that something is wrong. It doesn't mean that you're weak and need to suck it up. And there are many valid reasons for quitting, besides just quitting for an 8% pay raise in your next job. Here are just some of them. Tell me in the comments if I left out any. Constant high workloads. When people are asked to do more work than is humanly possible, and then often criticized for not reaching those goals. Long working hours. When the company demands that you regularly work crazy long hours like 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week or more. I have a whole video on how dumb that is. No work-life balance. When the workplace makes no effort to accommodate employees' private lives. May include things like limiting vacations and free time, or not offering things like parental leave or compassionate leave. Compromising your professional skills. When you're not allowed to do your work the right way, like a nurse who works in a hospital and knows that a certain procedure they're asking him to follow is bad for the patients and a better procedure exists. Meaningless work. When you have no idea why the work you do matters or makes a difference for anyone. Lack of training and development. Leaving employees to fall behind professionally. Bad bosses. In his excellent book, The No Asshole Rule, Stanford professor Bob Sutton argues that there are 2 kinds of bad bosses. Some are bad because they're incompetent, and some are sociopaths, and of course, some are both. He also says that if you work for a sociopathic boss, your only safe course of action is to get away ASAP. He further argues that some companies have an epidemic of bad bosses because they breed inside the organization. No, not with each other. But bad bosses hire or promote bad people, creating more bad bosses. They also make sure to design internal processes, like, for instance, HR systems, so that bad bosses are never held to account. Polluting the environment. Some companies increase profits by damaging the environment. Do not work for them. Unethical or illegal business practices. Some companies make money by being ethically shady or by, straight out breaking the law whenever it'll make them a buck. Hurting society. Some companies make their money in a way that directly damages the fabric of our society, like hedge funds that short stocks and drive otherwise healthy companies into bankruptcy, costing employees their jobs and pensions. Screwing the customer. Think of multi-level marketing companies like Herbalife that trick people into thinking they can make money selling their crappy products, even though their business model is mathematically guaranteed to screw over 99.9% of people who join. And the few who thrive can only do so by screwing over others. Or when the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals raised the price of the only drug that treats the toxoplasmosis parasitic infection from $13 per pill to $750. If you catch your workplace screwing the customers, quitting is noble. Hurting people. Some companies make products that hurt or kill people by design or as a byproduct, like cigarettes, landmines, or the drugs used in execution by lethal injection. Do you want your work efforts supporting that? Job insecurity. Some companies will fire people at the drop of a hat or commence a quick round of layoffs whenever they feel the stock price needs a little boost up. The resulting job insecurity can be very stressful. Toxic coworkers. The vast majority of people are nice, friendly, and kind, but assholes do exist, and working with them is awful. If management won't curb their behavior, you gotta get out. Sexual harassment. The best comment I've seen on the Me Too movement came from Adam Grant. He said that sexual harassment is often explained away as a few bad apples, so just a few men behaving badly. But he said the real problem is bad barrels, meaning organizations that are set up so that sexual harassers never end up facing real consequences. An unsafe work environment. When the company refuses to invest in keeping their employees safe and healthy, physically or mentally. Mistreating vulnerable employee groups. If people are being treated badly based on race, gender, age, or any other category or intersection of those categories in the workplace. Unfair compensation. When some groups are paid better than others for the same work, or when salaries are low compared to similar jobs in other companies, or when the company doesn't pay a living wage. Preferential treatment of coworkers. When the bonuses, promotions, rewards, and recognition tend to go to some preferred groups instead of to the people who've actually earned them. Unfair distribution of work tasks. This is when all the fun and interesting tasks go to some people and all the grunt work to others. No recognition for your work. When your good work is hardly ever appreciated, or everything you do is excessively nitpicked and criticized, or when other people take credit for your good work. Now, just to be clear, this list can kind of make it look like all workplaces suck, but they really don't. And while I think it's good to be critical of what it's like to work in a modern market-based capitalist economy, it is important to remember that there are also many good workplaces, competent bosses, and great co-workers out there. So some of the things on this list are things that may be done to you, while some may be things you see being done to others. Maybe you are being treated fairly, but you see coworkers of other races and genders being underpaid, marginalized, or mistreated. Maybe your team works ethically and legally, but the rest of the company cuts corners. And in that case, quitting is also a perfectly valid option. so that you don't have to stick around and validate a terrible organization with your presence and implicit acceptance. Imagine if all the workplaces that do things on this list were to lose a large share of their employees tomorrow. They would either have to clean up their act very quickly or they would go under. Look at me. I'm a middle-aged, cishet white dude, so obviously I have privilege coming out the ass.
I took the form of a 45-year-old white man for a reason. I can only fail up.
My entire work life, I've been in a position where I could quit my job at a moment's notice without taking any major life risks. But obviously, not everyone is that lucky. Maybe unemployment is crazy high in your country or industry and new jobs are just nowhere to be found. Maybe your family depends on your income, and if you quit, you're going to be homeless very soon. Maybe you're American and will lose health insurance if you're not employed. What do you do then? I'm going to share some pointers on what you can do to minimize the risks of staying in a bad job. But I should say right now that these won't apply in extreme circumstances. If, for instance, you're being bullied by coworkers, if you're being persecuted by a sociopathic manager or sexually harassed, these tactics will not work. So in that case, you really should seek help in whatever way you can. And if that doesn't work, I would strongly recommend doing everything you can to get out immediately. But if your job is not yet totally toxic and quitting is currently impossible, here are some tips for reducing the damage you take from staying on anyway. If you hate your job, spend as little time there as you can get away with. Can you work more from home? Can you shift your hours so you're not there when your toxic coworkers or boss are? Do you have vacation days or time off you can take? Can you get away for trainings or conferences? Use any and all available means to spend less time there. And if your workplace demands that you work crazy long hours, as I talked about in my video on the cult of overwork, can you cheat and make it look like you do? You have my permission to fake the hell out of it. As I shared in that video, bosses can't actually tell the difference between employees who work 80 hours a week and those who just pretend to. And employees working normal hours accomplish the same amount of work as the workaholics. Another survival tactic is to care as little as possible about everything job related. Stop caring what they think of you or say of you. Stop caring about the quality of your work, or at least care just enough about it not to get fired. Stop caring about whether or not you get raises and promotions or bonuses or even simple appreciation for the work you do. These people and this company obviously don't care about you. Why should you care about them? This is not normally advice I would give to anyone. I think everyone is entitled to a job they actually care about. But this is not going to be forever. This is a survival tactic here and now until you can get out. It can also help to remind yourself that you're staying in a bad job, but you're doing it for a good reason. For instance, to protect your family, to put food on the table while you find something better, to put a partner through an education, or whatever the reason may be. That way, you may be suffering, but you're suffering for a worthwhile purpose, which will make it easier to bear. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here, it says over the gate to Dante's Inferno. Being in hell with hope of escape or improvement would not be hell. It's only truly hell once you've lost all sense that things will get better. So do all you can to maintain the hope of a better job. Give your resume a spit polish. Start an intense search for a new and better job. Cast your net far and wide. Pester all of your friends, family, and former coworkers for leads on a better job. There's an entire body of research called hope theory that shows how important it is to humans to feel we can create a better situation for ourselves. Work to give yourself hope. Simply put, a bad job where you have hope is manageable. A bad job where all hope has been lost is hell. Shared misery is better than suffering alone. It can be nice to commiserate with friends or coworkers who are in similar situations because it can show you that you are not alone and that there's nothing wrong with you for feeling bad about a bad situation. If you do this, just try not to let it turn into a mutual complaint fest where everybody just lists all of their grievances and confirms each other's sense that everything sucks and will never get better. That kills that sense of hope that you desperately need. One of the biggest threats to happiness at work is having too many fixed expenses. When you're completely dependent on bringing home a paycheck or two every single month, you're vulnerable. If work turns out to be unbearable, you can't simply up and leave and risk a few months with no income. Is there any way you could build up some savings or reduce your fixed expenses to give yourself that cushion? And I realize this can be much easier said than done. And finally, make sure to have good times outside of work to make up for some of the crappiness at work. The problem is, of course, that a bad job makes you tired and less likely to go out and do fun things that you enjoy, like sports, hobbies, or social activities. But fun things give you energy you badly need to survive a crappy job. So do fun things. May I recommend swing dancing? In almost all circumstances, I would say quit in a way that's legal and polite. Legal means in most places that you have to do it in writing and give a certain amount of notice, and you'll have to figure out what's required by law in your country or in your current contract. Here's the thing though, if you don't want to, you don't have to give any reasons for why you're leaving. You may be offered an exit interview, and if you think this workplace is capable of learning, you absolutely can sit down and explain your reasons then. On the other hand, if this company is just too far gone, it's okay to decline an exit interview. Why waste your time if they're not going to listen? In most countries, unless specifically mandated in your contract, exit interviews are voluntary and they can't make you do one. As for polite, burning bridges might feel good, but it probably won't help you in the long run. But if you feel like making a statement, you could also quit with a little pizzazz.
And this is me expressing myself, okay? There it is. I hate this job. I hate this goddamn job and I don't need it.
Now, most people would say that the sensible thing to do is to line up a new job first before you quit the old one. And in many cases, I would agree. But it really depends on how bad things currently are for you. And here's the thing. If your job right now is really bad, the longer you stay, the more you lose the optimism, energy, and self-confidence that you need to go out and sell yourself to a new potential employer. Also, looking for a job can nearly be a full-time job in itself. It takes a lot of time to read job ads, write and send applications, and do interviews, and sometimes you'll have to do 5 or 6 interviews for the same job. If you were to quit your old job first, you'd probably have much more time and energy to find not just a job, but a great job. Also, quitting cold can send a powerful signal that might make things better for your coworkers who stay. In one of my previous workplaces, I'd been raising several issues for months with management, but nothing ever happened. But when I quit and told them I didn't have a new job lined up, that woke them up. And finally, maybe your adult life shouldn't be completely defined by a series of jobs. Maybe a few months without a job would actually be awesome.
Michael, I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing, and it was everything that I thought it could be.
Again, if you're privileged enough to afford it. If you need a little boost, I once asked the readers of my blog if any of them had ever quit cold, and I got a buttload of great stories from people who'd done it.
I quit my job today. I don't know what I'm going to do for sure. I just know that by quitting, I instantly improved the quality of my life.
I'll put a link in the video description so you can read all of these stories for inspiration if you need it. An 18-year-old British apprentice car mechanic killed himself after being bullied by coworkers. On one occasion, the young man said his colleagues had locked him in a cage at the garage by force, doused him in a flammable liquid, and set fire to his clothes. George's, the young man's line manager, Simon Wright, admitted to playing a number of pranks on George, but told the inquest after the suicide,
"I was in the workshop when a prank was played on George, and he was set on fire. It did not go too far. We knew where to draw the line. It was not bullying."
You set him on fucking fire. If that's not bullying, I don't know what is. But that's not even the worst part. This is. His father told the inquest that the evening before his death, George had been pacing around the house saying, "I have to quit. I can't go back there," over and over again. Having told his son not to resign from his job and that things would get better, Mr. Cheese said he now realized how ridiculous this response was. And yes, that was ridiculous, but not unusual. If you tell people around you that you want to quit, you may well meet the exact same reaction because they have fallen for the anti-quitting propaganda. This is to some degree generational. There is a huge debate on how millennials and younger generations are spoiled at work because they come into the workplace expecting recognition, professional growth, meaningful work, and reasonable working hours. And many older people struggle to relate to that, and they ask, what is wrong with young people these days that they're so demanding? When the real question should, of course, be, what is wrong with older people that they've given up on all of those things, all of those perfectly reasonable demands? When a friend or family member or coworker tells you, "I hate my job and I'm thinking of quitting," the correct answer is not, no, you just need to tough it out. Things will get better. The correct answer is, awesome idea. Good for you. How can I help? Quitting is not an easy choice, but sometimes it is the best choice, and the price of not making that choice can be very, very high. Whenever a friend tells me they've quit their job, my instant reaction is always, awesome! You took initiative and decided to move away from a bad job, maybe into something even better. You made a tough, brave career decision, and I admire you for it. I say we start celebrating those who quit their jobs for the brave, motivated, and proactive individuals they are. Bosses and workplaces can even do that too, though a lot of them don't. In 2005, Microsoft sued Google. They claimed that Google had illegally hired away an important Microsoft employee. And as part of the lawsuit, another former Microsoft employee shared an interesting story about what happened when he announced he was quitting.
Prior to joining Google, I set up a meeting on or about November 11, 2004, with Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer to discuss my planned departure. At some point in the conversation, Mr. Ballmer said, "Just tell me it's not Google." I told him it was Google. At that point, Mr. Ballmer picked up a chair and threw it across the room, hitting a table in his office. Mr. Ballmer then said, "Fucking Eric Schmidt is a fucking pussy. I'm gonna bury that guy. I've done it before, and I will do it again. I'm gonna fucking kill Google."
I think it's incredibly weird how some companies and managers get mad at employees who quit and accuse them of being disloyal. Now, I can absolutely see how a person quitting is inconvenient for them, and it will nearly always take bosses by surprise since you can't really openly admit that you're planning to quit to your boss. But on the other hand, taking a job is not a till death do you part kind of deal. And employment contracts are not for life. They have very specific clauses saying that employees can leave for any reason and stating exactly on what terms. So why treat employees who leave badly? It makes no sense to me, but it happens. One HR specialist told me how some bosses marginalize employees who quit. They may keep them out of important meetings, they start nitpicking their work, or they just fire them straight away.
Well, you know what? I'm not taking it anymore. The carnival is leaving Dicksville. I quit. You can't quit, Harry. You're fired. No!
One Danish company I talked to makes a special point of being nice to employees who quit. They give them a nice send-off, and they even run a social club for their ex-employees, their alumni. They do this because it's the right thing to do, but it also means that their former employees are now out there saying nice things about the company to other people in their field, potentially inspiring them to apply for a job there and attracting good candidates. And it also vastly increases the chances that the employee who quit will come back someday, maybe bringing new skills and experiences they learned from another job. And I'll actually take this a step further and say that companies should want unhappy employees to quit. If someone is miserable in their job and the company's efforts to help them don't work, the very best solution all around is for that person to quit and find a job that's better for them. One company I know of even pays employees to quit. Zappos, the online retailer based in Las Vegas, has a great culture. I've been there several times and seen it for myself. And one thing they do is they actually pay new hires up to $4,000 to quit. They do this to make sure that the new hires don't stay on just for the paycheck, but because they actually like it there. And they've figured out that it's cheaper for the company if unhappy employees leave earlier. Zappos is now owned by Amazon, and I was so bummed out when Amazon took this otherwise awesome idea and completely perverted it. Right now, workers at an Amazon warehouse in Alabama are trying to unionize, and Amazon are doing everything they can to prevent it, as they always do. And one thing they did, they sent all the workers at the plant an email offering them up to $3,000 to quit. And workers were even told that if they did quit now, they might be hired back after the election on whether to unionize. The point being, of course, that if they quit, they can't vote in that election. And in the meantime, Amazon can replace them with people they know will vote against unionizing. In terms of employer-employee relations, I think that's what you call a dick move. All right, I'll be the first to admit that I have it super easy as a Dane. In Denmark, we have great unemployment benefits and free healthcare, so people here risk very little when they quit a job. I would also argue that Danish society is much more accepting of people quitting a job they don't like, because Danes put a high value on being happy at work. I'm working on a video right now on why working in Denmark is better than working in America, and subscribe now if you don't want to miss that one. And of course, I realize that in a capitalist society, the idea that people might choose not to work for a while is abhorrent. Capitalism needs everyone to be out there producing and consuming at a high rate, or the GDP might not grow enough this year. So a lot of politicians actively seek to punish the unemployed. They can seek to punish them financially by reducing unemployment benefits to levels you just can't live on, usually claiming that they want to make sure that it pays to work. Here's the thing though, you could also make that happen if you raised minimum wages, but somehow conservatives never quite make that connection. They can go after quitters with this specifically. In some countries, you're eligible for unemployment benefits if you get fired, but not if you quit yourself. What is that but a blatant attempt by politicians to stigmatize quitting and keep people stuck, no matter how bad their jobs are? Many countries also make you prove that you're actively looking for a new job in order to continue receiving unemployment benefits, and they might even take them away if you turn down any job offer, even if the new job is completely unappealing to you. In a capitalist society, they don't care if you like your job, they just want you to work. In addition, many politicians, especially on the right, use some stunningly harsh rhetoric against the unemployed, calling them freeloaders or parasites, and often implying that their lack of employment is due to flaws in their character. So society can support quitters in three ways. One, you can offer unemployment benefits that people can live on, and also give them to people who quit themselves. Two, you can remove any stigma attached to being unemployed. And three, you can support people in finding good jobs, not just a job. Otherwise, they'll just be back in no time looking for another new job. I have tried to be completely honest about what I want this video to achieve. I want more people to quit their jobs simply because they don't like them. I have focused on quitting jobs, but really this applies to many other areas like relationships, friendships, family, sports, hobbies, or education. Philosophically speaking, the ability to quit is a fundamental freedom that should apply in all areas of life. Without that freedom, things are bad. In dictatorships, you're not allowed to leave your country. Under feudalism, farmers couldn't leave their lord's land. Under religious tyranny, you're not allowed to renounce your faith. And under fundamentalist family values, you're not allowed to leave a marriage. It's a hallmark of modern enlightened societies that you are free to leave. But what good is having that freedom on paper if you never exercise it? Or if powerful social control mechanisms conspire to vilify anyone who even thinks of making the leap? And let's face it, workplaces have a lot of power over employees. As long as they don't break employment law, they can decide what we work on, where we work, when we work, who we work with, and what we get paid for it. The one power we have over them, no matter how abusive or toxic they may be, is that we can walk away. I say we exercise that power when it makes sense, and they won't be able to do a thing about it. It's not like they can show up at your home each morning and force you to go to work at gunpoint. Now, I honestly don't think that any workplaces are promoting this myth that quitting is bad deliberately so that more people will put up with bad jobs and asshole bosses. But it is very easy to see how it plays right into their hands and gives them more leeway to treat employees badly. If there is a strong bias against quitting, as we've seen there is, more people will accept toxic cultures and terrible treatment for much longer. As we saw, a bad workplace can and will hurt you in many ways. So if you're feeling the tiniest bit vindictive and you want to hurt them back, quitting your job is your chance to do just that. And it will hurt them because replacing you will be expensive. Most managers hate hiring new people because the hiring process itself takes time and money, and new employees have to be trained and gain experience before they perform well. The rule of thumb in HR is that replacing a worker costs somewhere between 50% and 200% of their annual salary. Some bad bosses even try to predict who will quit by spying on their browser history at work to maybe see if they're spending a lot of time on LinkedIn or job search sites. And I gotta say, I would honestly love it if quitting became more normalized, so bad bosses everywhere had to live in constant fear of the next resignation letter ticking in and of the ensuing cost and hassle of trying to replace that person. Being willing to quit is so important because just knowing that you can quit makes things better, and vice versa. Believing that you are stuck in a bad workplace and unable to get away makes it so much worse. If you tell yourself that you can't quit your job, no matter how badly they treat you, then you're not an employee. You're a slave. Remember the myth of the boiling frog and how frogs are not idiots and will actually get out of the water before things get too bad? In 1869, the German scientist Friedrich Goltz proved that there is actually one kind of frog that will stay in the water even as it heats up to a temperature that will kill it. And that is a frog that has had its brain removed. Do not be that frog. Stay happy.